Front layer of the Eisenheim altarpiece is one of the most disgusting crucifixion scenes you'll ever see. But before we get to the crucifixion scene, let me point out the two side panels. On each side panel is a guy. There are two guys, all right? On one side panel, we've got Saint Sebastian, who was actually supposed to be able to protect against the plague. He's the dude on your left, and if you look in the window behind him, see where all those little circles are up to the upper right? You can see this ugly gargoyle creature blowing in the window. That represents the Black Death or the Black Plague against which he guards. On the other side is Saint Anthony. Saint Anthony was actually a saint who they attempted to martyr him, and he survived being shot with an arrow without bleeding. And you can see him actually impaled there in the picture on your far right. Ergotism was associated with him because of the closing down of the blood vessels. People would lose fingers, toes, hands, and feet, and yet they would not bleed because the blood vessels had been closed off. So the lack of bleeding was associated with the saint, and he helped to protect against ergotism in their faith. The central panel is a disturbing crucifixion, but part of what makes that crucifixion so interesting is Grunwald's purpose in creating it. He's creating something where the heart outranks the head. His goal here is to create a sense of empathy, a sense that Jesus understands and cares about the suffering that the people in this church are going through. And so he portrays Jesus in this horrible, horrible state to create that sense of empathy. On the inside of this panel, if you open this side up, you're going to see these images. These are images of Mary. On the left is the Annunciation, where Mary is told that she's going to have a baby. In the next panel over to your right, the second panel, Mary is shown delivering baby Jesus with angels and celebration all around her. The third panel, Mary is shown holding baby Jesus, and incidentally, the outfit she's wearing is the same outfit that nuns wore to care for the sick in the town of Eisenheim. And then clear at the right-hand side is an amazing picture that shows Jesus being raised from the dead. Again, these are pictures of caretaking and power. These would be folded out for things like the Easter service. And last but not least, the innermost layer of the Eisenheim altarpiece is this. This actually represents the patron saint of the monastery. You can see him enthroned in the center. Scenes from his life surround the carvings in the center, and this particular area of the altarpiece would be opened up for special occasions and special honoring of their patron saint. Now, I want to look back at two of those pictures in particular. The first is the crucifixion. In the scene, you have Jesus being crucified. On your left, you have John the Apostle holding up Mary, the mother of Jesus. She's the chick all in white. Mary Magdalene is kneeling at the base of the cross, weeping. At your right is John the Baptist pointing toward Jesus, prophesying. That's what the writing is beside him, prophesying the coming of Jesus. There is a stream of blood from Jesus' side going into the cup down there, being held by the Lamb. The Lamb, of course, representing Jesus as the one who sacrifices himself for the salvation of humanity. What I want you to look at, though, is the figure of Jesus. He's revolting. His skin is covered in bumps and reddish-black spots. His body is twisted and convulsed. Why on earth would Grunwald do that? That's disgusting. Grunwald does this because he wants to show Jesus as having all the same symptoms of disease that the people in the church do. People with ergotism convulse. Jesus' hands look convulsed. People with ergotism and the Black Death have ruptures of blood vessels under the skin and hemorrhaging under the skin. Jesus has those same markings of hemorrhaging under the skin. The message that Grunwald is sending here is very clear. He knows that people are going to be brought into this church in agony, dying, convulsing, bleeding. They need comfort. They need to know that God understands their suffering. So Grunwald paints Jesus in a way that displays their suffering. Why am I showing you this? Because I want you to remember something. This is a Catholic picture. It goes in a church. And yet here, the Catholic picture is reflecting the same thing the Protestants are selling. Jesus understands the individual suffering. Jesus cares about individual people. There is this personal connection that the Protestants emphasize so strongly, and yet here the Catholics are emphasizing the same thing. There is this connection between Jesus. He understands the suffering of the ordinary person. But Grunwald's altarpiece has multiple parts to it. It's not just Jesus understanding the suffering of people. Jesus also has power. He's got the power to give them a peaceful afterlife. If you look, this is a picture of Jesus rising from the dead. Now, usually during this time period when we have resurrection pictures, Jesus is kind of wearing a toga, looking a little bit tired and leaning against a big stone coffin. Right? Grunwald does not go that direction. Instead, Grunwald has the splody Jesus. Jesus is like tearing out of that stone coffin. There's a Roman soldier in the background, like getting knocked on his can, like rolling in a somersault. Dude in the front is totally just been bowled over, and he's trying to shield his eyes from the glow of Jesus. Jesus is giving off light. Oh my gosh. It's hard to see where his head stops and the light starts. Not only that, there's so much power coming off of him that he's actually got light shining out of holes in his hands and his feet. He is glowing with power. And Grunwald wants to remind the people in the church that Jesus has this kind of power and that Jesus is going to use it to help them. Now, again, there's this sense of individual personal care. Jesus cares about you. You can have a relationship with God. But there's a side note from that. If you can have a personal relationship with God and God cares about you personally, then there's also this secondary thing, because then God's not the only one who cares about you personally. So does Satan. In the early 1500s, there's this massive upswing of fear and superstition about devil worship and witches. In fact, there are witch hunts across Europe during this time period. It comes from that idea that the supernatural is directly connected with us. This thing that the Protestants are promoting, that you don't have to go to the priest, you don't have to go through a middleman, God talks to ordinary people. Okay, so like if God talks to ordinary people, they assume the competition does too. They assume that Satan comes around and like propositions people. And of course, if you are a woman over the age of 40, you're not married, and you have a cat, you are totally a witch, all right? This fear of witchcraft, and also a fear of a new rising trend called science, both come strongly into play. Now, science is something that we hear, oh yay, science! Well, a lot of people still don't quite understand science. Science is not a new thing. It's been around since the beginning, but it came out a lot in the Renaissance. I mean, you remember all the guys who used math in their pictures in the Renaissance? Science is coming out more and more. It's becoming more and more of a factor among the intelligent and intellectuals. But for people who are not intellectuals, they hear about the stuff that science is doing and they don't quite get it. To them, science sounds a lot like magic. And so there's this entire fear of science and a belief in a pseudo-science called alchemy. It's a combination of science and magic, where like they believe in this magical rock called the Philosopher's Stone that can grant you immortality. They believe that they can use rituals to turn lead into gold. But a lot of those rituals suspiciously involve things like sacrificing babies and having sex with the devil. That fear is probably best shown in the artwork of a gentleman named Hieronymus Bosch. Now, Hieronymus Bosch, we don't know that much about him. And, you know, there's that old catchphrase, it's always the quiet ones you gotta watch. Well, that's Hieronymus Bosch. As far as we know, Hieronymus Bosch just stays in his hometown his whole life. He's not Dürer. He does not go on a tour of Europe. He stays home. And he paints really weird stuff. Whatever's at home must be good. I always joke that there are happy mushrooms in his backyard. Bosch is unique. Bosch is what we call a narrative artist. In other words, when Bosch paints a picture, the picture contains a lot of little stories or vignettes. There are many little stories or vignettes in the big picture. And by looking over the picture, you can see different stories being told that make a point, teach a lesson, or tell a story. Hieronymus Bosch's best known work is called The Garden of Earthly Delights. It's a triptych, 3 panels. It's painted in 1515. It is narrative art. There are a variety of things happening, little stories and vignettes in each of the 3 panels. This is a progression. It is a morality lesson. And I'll show you each panel up close in just a second here. But I know you're sitting there squinting at the screen. That's why I said that. Your 3 panels here, all right? Your left-hand panel shows the creation of Eve in the Garden of Eden. It is the beginning of the concept of lust, because of course lust starts with Eve. It's all woman's fault. The middle panel is actually the Garden of Earthly Delights. It's lust gone wild. It's what happens when you give in to lust and indulge your lust fantasies. The right-hand panel is actually what happens after you indulge your lust fantasies. It's Hieronymus Bosch's vision of hell. These 3 panels are filled with images and symbols. A lot of them we don't even know what they mean. Bosch came up with them. And part of what is fascinating and freaky as you look through these panels, Bosch does not do a lot of pre-planning. Bosch's imagination spits out what you're looking at as fast as he can paint it. We know that by analyzing the paint, because he paints figures, multiple figures using the same batch of paint, and they're not always in the same part of the canvas. He simply is painting as fast as he can to keep up with his own imagination, which is insane. Now, we're going to start on the left, and we're going to move right.